Well, welcome to our 7th week together. We are nearing the home stretch. Next week is your final week of our class together. And this week we are diving into the elements of script writing and how to tell a story through a script, particularly in a broadcast script. Now, this class is mostly journalistically focused, but the principles that we learn in this class can be applied across the board in public relations, advertising, and any kind of field that requires script writing or that requires good storytelling. But this week we are diving into our script writing class. Now, you do have your promotional story due, which is your last of your written, I would say your written print type online projects. And of course, if you need a draft, that should still be submitted by Wednesday and I can review it for you. And last week we talked about including a call to action, so I want to encourage you guys, as you are preparing this, that you want to make sure that you are following the format, that you are following the formulas that were presented in the course material last week. But that is what is due this week. And this week we are, like I said, we are starting our script writing segment of our course. So before I get too deep into that, let's go ahead and dive into our class. There's my kids there. There's our class. All right. So this week we're looking at the elements of broadcast script writing. Now we do cover radio, and we'll get a little bit more into that next week, which is similar, but it's a little bit different. But this week specifically, we are talking about broadcast script writing. When you think of news, you think of the news style. Maybe it's your local news or CNN or anything like that. You think of broadcast style news writing. We're going to introduce the basic terms. Now, in any newsroom, they're going to vary a little bit, but they're all basically the same ideas. So some basic script writing broadcast terms that you'll get into, and I've given you some PDFs of those basic terms that you'll need to refer to if you're not familiar. And some basic videography tips. I'll share with them that you can actually do all of this on your phone if you should choose to do that. Not necessarily for this project, but going forward, any kind of filming that you want to do, you can basically do this on your phone. And I give you some tips there on how to do that with your phone. This week we have chapters 10 and 14 to read. There's a lot of other material or a lot of other chapters that actually cover more script writing. That covers more of the feature type script writing or movie style script writing. If you want to read that for extra, that's perfectly fine. But this week we're focusing on chapters 10 and 14, which specifically cover television news. We have a couple of really important PowerPoints that you want to look at, that you want to watch. The PowerPoint here on broadcast script writing. I go over the basics here, again, reviewing some of those things, the basics of just the mechanics of script writing if you're not familiar. And then, of course, the elements that you want to include by my dear friend Donna Russell here. That's a really important video for you to watch there. So be sure that you do pay attention to those videos there. And of course I have some PDFs here, as I said, that include the guidelines that you will need to refer to and the script terms that will help you as you're scripting. When we talk about, and I'll get into the chapters here in a bit, chapter 10, in your text, we talk about broadcast script writing. Your author talks a lot about some of the mechanics and the things that you want to consider. And I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit here, but when you talk about script writing, it is very different from print writing. When you think about print writing or online writing, you're relying on the viewer or your audience to read the story that you've written. And so they are more naturally engaged because their brain has to be more engaged in reading the material. You know, if you start passively reading a book, then you're not really paying attention to the words. In broadcast writing, you have a more passive observer. You have a more passive audience. They're watching the video, so you have to be concerned about what are they seeing, how is it matching up with your story, and they're also listening. And so you have a viewer, an audience that's a little more passive, so you have to really be really intentional with the words that you use and the visuals that you use paired together. So broadcast is pairing the audio with the video together, and your scripts will reflect that, how the video cues up with the audio that you have. So in chapter 10, we talk about just the elements of the story. Like I said, the stories are seen and heard, not read. You have to use good writing, visuals, and audio to tell your story. And think of how it looks. Think about it sounds. It's really important to read your script out loud so you can hear how it sounds. Some words are harder to hear they're a good word in print, but sometimes it's just harder to say and it's harder to hear. And you think about passive listeners, if they didn't catch the word, they're not going to catch your story. So think about how it sounds. You always want to also write in a conversational tone. Think about if you're watching a broadcast news story and how easy it sounds to hear. You can hear it. It's very conversational. Even with that, all the qualities of good storytelling still apply. You're just using a different medium to tell the story. You're telling it in a visual way. You're telling it in an audio way versus just reading. As I said already, think about how it sounds. Every word is important. How is it received to the listener? How is it received as they're watching the video with the audio together? Like I said, they're far more passive consumers of the story that you're telling. You also it's important to lead with the most compelling elements. Now, I've been hitting home with this on your leads, on your stories. Even in broadcast script writing, your lead element is the most important because you still have to capture attention. It's written differently. It's very simple, but it still has to capture attention. And as you're reading chapter 10, I want you to pay close attention to pages 121 through 124. Our author gives some key style issues, and when you're script writing, different style issues to pay attention to. Remember, this is only read by the person who's voicing the narration, who's voicing the track. And so you have to look at it in the terms of how do they need to pronounce these words. If you have an abbreviation, for example, you wouldn't, like YMCA, you wouldn't pronounce YMCA together. You want to give cues to the person reading it that they need to pronounce each letter. So those are the things that you want to consider as you're script writing. There's also plenty of examples. Now, I give you some examples of scripts this week and next week. Some sample scripts so you can kind of see how this looks. I know for me, it really helps to have that visual example in front of me. Is how is this supposed to look if I haven't done it before? But your book also gives some good examples. Now, terminology might vary slightly, but you get the idea of how this should look and how this should pair up together between your video and your audio. In chapter 14 now, let me just jump ahead again. This chapter really summarizes the key structural things you want to consider when you're writing a script. Style is important, and also length. If you have a story, in most broadcast shows, you have a very short story, 30 seconds, 20 seconds. Those are short. In a broadcast package, which we'll talk about in just a minute, they could be about a minute to minute 20. It's actually a very short window of time for you to get your script written and have your story told. So those are things to consider as you're putting your script together. Again, every word counts. All the things are intentional, and they all go together to tell your story. So in your assignment this coming week, and we'll get again to this next week, you're going to be taking a story that you've already written. It could be the story you write this week for your promotional story, or it could be one that you've already written, your event story, your character profile, or your business story. You're going to be taking this story and reworking it into a script. Now, when I say reworking it into a script, you're basically going to rewrite it in a script form. So you're going to have to probably take some things out, highlight things that are more important to put in a broadcast story, and rethink your story in terms of how would this look in a broadcast script. Now, most students don't have enough of the visuals elements that they need to put into their story. So in many cases, I encourage students to use what you do have. If it's a picture, cue the picture that you're going to be using to your audio. If you don't, I have allowed students in the past to write a video in a hypothetical sense. Let's say it's some B-roll of someone walking into their office, or the B-roll of the front of the building of the business story that you told, or something to that effect. So I have allowed students to give a hypothetical video if they don't have it. Or if they find something online, they can cue that, tell me where the in and out points would be, etc. And so if you don't have enough visual, don't be worried about it. But the bottom line is you're going to be taking a story you've already done. So you're not reinventing a wheel here. You're not writing a new story. You're taking something that you've already had and converting it into a broadcast script. Now, this is what we mean by multi-platform writing. You're taking a script, in many cases in news today, or in any kind of field you go into, you're going to take the same content and write it for the different platforms. You're going to write it for online, you're going to write it for radio, you're going to write it for broadcast, and you're going to write it for social media. All those mediums require different strategies. And so this is an exercise for you to learn how to take a story you've written and now rethink it in terms of a broadcast script. So if you have any questions, of course, as you get into this, you can always reach out to me. Next week I'll get into this again next week, but next week you actually do have a graded draft deadline on Tuesday. So as you're getting through this week, be thinking about your broadcast script and thinking about that Tuesday deadline, because that is important for me to look at your scripts. I give a lot of feedback on your script. I looked at just the mechanics of how you're putting your video in and your audio in, and then I also look at your script. Are you using those points in good script writing? So it's a process. Now, I'm very lenient on my grading for that because I understand a lot of students aren't familiar with how to write a script. But it is good practice. So that draft is important, and we'll get into that next week. Again, this week you only have your promotional story due, so that is your priority for this week. And that is basically it for our class. I think I've already gone over your story assignments that are due the promotional stories that due this week, and then you have, of course, a grammar quiz. Again, as I say always, if you have any questions or you're stuck on something, you're not sure about something, always reach out to me. I'm very happy to respond, and I'm usually pretty quick about responding. So reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns. And as always, I pray you have a wonderful week.